Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Stuart Kramer, Chief Manufacturing Officer at Next Generation Manufacturing Canada, Chief Program Officer, pardon me, new title. I'm joined by a couple of my colleagues, Christy Mikulak and MC Stevens. And today is the first in a series of webinars to discuss the defense sector and the opportunity for Canadian manufacturers to pivot and to enter both defense sector and dual-use sector. In future webinars, we'll explore certifications and cybersecurity. We'll talk about the market in more detail and ways to enter. And then we'll actually be taking questions today. And in many cases, we'll formulate the content of future webinars based on the questions that you come to us with. So to get started, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Christy, who is much better in French than I am, to do the welcome and the land acknowledgement. So Christy.
Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue. We acknowledge that we're meeting today on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples across Canada, including First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. We recognize their enduring relationship with the land and their continued contributions to this country. Nous reconnaissons que nous nous réunissons aujourd'hui sur les territoires traditionnels des peuples autochtones du Canada, y compris les Premières Nations, les Inuits et les Métis. Nous reconnaissons leur relation durable avec ces terres et leur contribution continue. Next slide, Stuart. Okay, thank you. So before we dive in, I just want to briefly situate who NGen is. Next Generation Manufacturing Canada, NGen. And yes, I just saw in the chat, we will be recording and sharing this presentation. Thank you. NGen is one of Canada's 5 global innovation clusters funded by the Government of Canada. We're an industry-led organization with a national mandate to strengthen Canada's advanced manufacturing capabilities, not only through funding, which we do, but also by helping companies to build collaborations and understand how our complex ecosystem works. A big part of that is helping to recognize and navigate emerging opportunities. And of course, one of the biggest opportunities today in Canada is in defense. And this is what brings us all together today. Thanks, Stuart.
So Budget 2025 commits to Canada's defense and talks about our national sovereignty. By taking on the challenge of rebuilding our industrial base, this is a generational shift for Canada. So this isn't just the flavor of the day. It's not something that's going to come and go. This is a long-term structural change in Canada's posture and in our defense industrial structure. And so this isn't something you have to do quick. This is something that's going to be around. And so what we want to talk about today is a little bit more about how you do approach the defense sector with the knowledge that this is here to stay. Defense doesn't move quickly. The cycles are very, very long. And the fundamentals of operating in the defense market aren't really different than the fundamentals of any other market, but they do play out a little bit differently in terms of your business and how you operate. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. The first thing we wanted to do is talk a little bit about exactly what does Canada buy and what does Canada sell in the sector. And so the defense and dual-use sectors are vast, they're diverse. What we did is we pulled publicly available data for the last 5 years, and then we tried to extract anything that was non-manufacturing related to just give manufacturers a sense of how much is out there that is actually manufactured goods. We looked at over 89,000 individual purchase orders, so we really did a lot of work. We damn near choked ChatGPT for a while with this stuff, so it was a lot of data. But what we hope you'll find is some ideas for places to look, a sense of maybe some of the things that Canada imports today, but also some of the things that we export. So what do we import? We took the 5 years of data and we aggregated it, and then this is all normalized to 100%. Obviously, some of these categories are much larger than others, and we'll talk about orders of magnitude in a minute. But what you can see is there are some areas where virtually everything we procure is already domestically sourced, and some areas where there's a lot of international sourcing. And so what we think this gives some ideas about are some of the opportunities. Parts, spares, and replaceables, MRO, sustainment is a really strong opportunity for manufacturers. And so we call your attention to that. Vehicles and mobility is a category that includes ground vehicles and ships, and there's a lot of Canadian content embedded in in these numbers. So even where things look like they're procured from overseas or from the US, a lot of that involves Canadian content. But there is a lot of opportunity. When you look by year, what we did is we plotted year over year procurement. The vertical axis is logarithmic because of the scale of the purchases. So you can see uh, in the tens of billions of dollars in some of the categories. Defense procurement is lumpy. And so the way to understand it from a manufacturing standpoint isn't necessarily to look at what's being purchased today and say, okay, that's today's opportunity. Multi-year procurement is the mode for defense, and it takes a very, very long time to build product and to build supply chains. So you really want to look at what's been purchased and what's been ordered in the past and position yourself over the long term. So what's ordered today may not be in production for a couple of years. You can see like in 2025, there was only 5% of procurement was from outside of Canada. That's really very, very temporal. It depends on what we buy and where we buy it from. And so that doesn't represent a long-term trend. And in the past 5 years, as much as 40% of procurement was coming from outside of Canada. It's really important to stay close to your customers. And in a lot of cases, customers will publish information. For example, in the aerospace sector, your customers will publish a skyline forecast, and that will tell you how many aircraft of each model they're delivering over the future. And similar trends can be found for defense procurement. And so, again, to understand the demand, go to your customers and talk to your customers. And when you look at what's being ordered, look to who's getting orders, and that's really where to position and where to do your market assessments. There's a very, very long tail for defense procurement. Year over year, the three highest categories for what we purchase are vehicles and mobility systems, not surprisingly, aerospace components, which includes aircraft, spacecraft, helicopters, and the things that go into them, and buildings and infrastructure. And for buildings and infrastructure, we tried to separate out manufactured goods from non-manufactured goods. So we took out things like real estate and other things that were not going to be of interest to manufacturers. There are also some great opportunities for market entry in parts, spare parts, repairables. There's a lot of purchasing, and also Canada does a big business in munitions. That's not an easy point of entry, but from a long-term standpoint, it's a very robust point of entry. Electronics, comms, and sensors, again, there's some difficulty or challenges in entering. They're very differentiated markets, but they're a place where our capabilities and our technologies play extremely well. And so, again, strong markets for Canadian manufacturers. And then clothing, PPE, and soldier systems is going to be a great market as well, especially as we grow the ranks in our services, and we have to equip more people. In terms of what we export and where we export, 72% of what we export is going to non-NATO countries. And so we really have quite a diverse customer base. The market's controlled, but it's certainly not closed. And export logic matters. So when you're looking at your positioning and you're looking for where you want to play in the defense sector, you also need to understand international standards and practices. You can't only look to Canada. You want to look opportunistically at the broader market. So what's being purchased in the Middle East? What does that need to look like? What if I'm shipping to Europe? What are the requirements that I have to comply with for packaging, for data privacy? There's a lot of other things you want to consider when you plan your business. Most firms are not exporting big stuff. So, and most likely, most manufacturers, when they start to export in these spaces, are going to be embedded in somebody else's system. So understanding how you make yourself a really good supplier is important. Traceability, documentation. There's a lot of flow down stuff that can be a real competitive advantage for a manufacturer as an offering to a higher level manufacturer, higher tier. May surprise you to learn that our biggest export customer outside of the US is Saudi Arabia. But here are our 12 largest non-US customers in the defense sector. So if you have established relationships, customers, suppliers in any of these markets, this would be another place to look to start to talk about opportunities to export in the defense sector or dual use sector. All of this data is publicly available, and the references is at the bottom of the page. You'll get these slides and you'll have access to that. In terms of export and what we do export, for 2024, this is a list that shows how many export licenses were applied for, just to give you a scope of transactionally. As you can see, for dual use goods, 1,121 submitted applications, 858 or 77% were approved. For Group 2 munitions, 2,953 applications, 2,438 were approved. There's a lot of licenses being granted there, and that represents 83% of those that were submitted. You can see some returned without action, some withdrawn. In many cases, the ones that have been returned without action were sent back for clarification or modification. So they weren't necessarily dead. They just needed to be revisited in some capacity. But if you know what you're doing and you're well prepared and you have the market, in most cases, you will be successful in getting your license. You just have to understand the lay of the land. It's not a crapshoot. We also wanted to tabulate the breakdown for munitions of Group 2, which is available. These are Wassenaar munitions, $2.8 billion of exports. This will include exports to the US by category, and a lot of interesting places for manufacturers to look. Things like 2-16 forgings, castings, or other unfinished products, for example. $6.5 billion of business. That is a really interesting market for manufacturers who haven't entered this space. But again, when you look at the things that we export, you probably have customers and suppliers who are already supplying the defense sector in one of these areas. And so this again gives you some ideas for where you might find places where you're already in the defense sector or you're very close to the defense or dual use sector. And so this can also inform your business development activities. But the key takeaways for targeting this market, you're going to want to enter through the supply chains. Infrastructure is of real interest because there'll be a lot of growth in infrastructure over the next few years in Canada. Sustainment is a really great place to enter, spare parts, things like that. Ammunition, electronics have higher barriers. Aerospace has higher barriers, but they tend to be really sticky if you get in. And they're really strong markets for Canadian manufacturers. We still are importing a lot of spares and repairables. That will represent an opportunity potentially for qualification. So again, talk to your customers, talk to your suppliers, and look for those opportunities. For defense, the best entry lanes are boring, repeatable, and risk reducing. Companies are really looking to purchase reliable supply rather than anything flashy. So this isn't necessarily being the most technically advanced that gets you in the market. It really is knowing your basics and being really strong fundamentally. That is the quickest way. So the best way to flourish is to have very, very strong processes and then make very smart and focused use of advanced manufacturing practices and technologies. So the technologies in advanced manufacturing may not be the thing that gets you in the market, but it's going to be the thing that keeps you there and lets you grow. But to get into the market, you really have to be very strong in fundamentals. And with that, I'm going to hand off to my colleague, Christy, who's going to talk a little bit more about that and what that looks like. Christy?
Okay, thanks, Stuart. So What I'd like to do now is shift the lens slightly and talk about what all of this opportunity means for individual companies and through a company lens. Because we're talking about a Defense 101 session today, we're taking the lens that those of you who are joining us, or companies or supporting organizations, are interested to learn about defense, but maybe haven't yet started to enter the sector. Later webinars, and we'll be hosting them monthly, will be much more detailed for those of you who want to continue to learn more. So as we're going through this, if you have questions that you'd like us to address in follow-on webinars, please put them in the chat. We might not be able to answer everything today, but they will be informing our follow-on programming. So, okay, back to today's session. This part is about helping companies to take a look and to exercise judgment. Defense is a huge opportunity in Canada right now and will be for decades to come, as Stuart mentioned, but it's not a default growth path for everyone, and it's not something that every company should pursue right away. In fact, one of the healthiest outcomes of this webinar might be that you develop a roadmap and a travel path for you to start to enter. So what we'll focus on for the next 15 minutes or so is how defense actually behaves through the lens of an SME, where companies tend to fit, and how to avoid early moves that can make the sales path even more challenging. Next slide, Stuart. Okay, so before we go on, I want to ground this in a little bit of reality. The first thing to say out loud is you are not missing out if you don't move immediately. For a lot of companies, the time to first revenue from defense is typically 18 to 36 months, and we've even seen cycles as long as 5, 7, 10 years. Defense operates on really long timelines, and early on, companies focus on learning, on qualification, on building relationships, on positioning, not on immediate revenue. So whether that works for your business model is an important strategic decision. Another framing that matters is certifications. So your ISO, AS9100, CGP, cyber, etc. And we'll be going into those deeply in our second session. But I want to be really precise here. Certifications, getting your certification will not automatically create customers. It does create eligibility for people to speak with you. So it allows customers to take a look, to consider your business, but what actually wins the opportunity to work with them is by coming up with customer-specific qualifications, looking at that roadmap, and building up trust with specific customers. It's also really important to understand that most companies don't enter defense from the very top. The majority of companies in Canada enter indirectly, so usually at the tier 2 or tier 3 level, rather than selling directly to the Department of National Defense. That's how the system's designed to work for risk mitigation and for learning, and we'll unpack what that looks like for companies in the next few slides. The bottom half of this slide shows how defense opportunities tend to cluster in terms of risk for SMEs. So on the left are the more entry-friendly roles: core manufacturing, materials, tooling, MRO, testing, quality services. Many Canadian manufacturers are already operating at this level and may not even know that their products are going into defense, or maybe operating in defense adjacent sectors where the pivot could be very simple to come in. Moving right, though, the roles become a little bit more certification heavy, a little bit more time, a little bit more relationship buildup. And then at the far right, we have the long cycle and high barrier to entry points. These areas are not off limits, of course, but they take more time, more specialization, and more patience. So consider your fit and your timing while you're considering your strategy. Next slide, Stuart. Okay, so how do you actually make the decision, though? So what I'd like to walk you through is a decision filter. We're not going to give you a checklist that shows you now you're ready, but what we'd like you to do is be able to cut through some of the information just to save time and figure out if this is a path that is right for you. Being honest right now at this stage will save you infinite time, money, and frustration later and help set you up for success. Next slide. Okay, so companies that engage successfully in defense typically have a really strong underlying commercial fundamentals in place. So they have reliable cash flow, they have repeat customers, and they have a comfortable margin where they can absorb long learning periods and relationship building cycles without immediate revenue. Again, defense programs move really slowly, and early conversations are going to give you insights, maybe understand qualification steps, and build up those relationships. And when things go well, even when that's going well, meaningful revenue can take years. So companies need to have the financial and operational sustainability to sustain the lag. Operational excellence matters as well. Defense environments place a huge premium on consistency, documentation, quality processes, and the ability to deliver the same result again and again over long periods of time. So businesses that already are highly regulated or safety critical or working in high reliability markets will find this transition a lot easier than companies who have not already built up those capabilities. Finally, it goes without saying now, as I think we've said it a few times, but if your business depends on fast turnover, short sales cycles, or continuous reinvention to survive, defense might be difficult without a strong commercial base underneath it, and it will take leadership patience. So the takeaway here is not that your business has to be perfectly ready, but that defense most often works best when it's added to an operationally mature business. Consider if you have areas that can benefit from being analyzed and strengthened as you build up your entry plan. Next slide. So what do buyers actually look for? A really common misconception is if we get our credentials, if we get our certifications, then we'll be able to enter the market. And that is not necessarily true. So what buyers are really looking for, again, is that trust inside existing supply chains and proven capabilities. So reliability signals. Okay, so things like long-standing customers, experience in those high reliability environments, and frequent and trustworthy deliveries. Many companies already demonstrate these capabilities in commercial markets, and defense buyers will pay close attention to those patterns of behavior. Okay, how you deliver, how you communicate, and how realistic are you about your capabilities? Next slide. Depth over breadth. So we noticed that SMEs succeed even better in Canada by being very good at one narrow thing and becoming very, very difficult to replace in the supply chain. So that's not necessarily a product. It might be a process, a component, a material, a service, or a capability that fits really well into someone else's system. Defense really wants you to be very, very clear about the role you play. So I'm going to give you a couple of useful checks so you know if you've reached that level of clarity. First of all, can you describe where your company fits or your capability fits in the supply chain? And what specific problem are you solving for your customers without referencing either the customer or the end system? So for example, you don't want to say or stop at, I supply parts to naval systems. You need to get to the granularity of, I make precision finished parts that meet strict dimensional and traceability requirements, as an example. And consider also, are you aiming for tier 2 or 3 supplier or a process specialist within a tier 1? You want to get to that level of definition. This also ties directly to risk posture for buyers. So they're not looking for suppliers who can do many things reasonably well. They're looking for suppliers who can be predictable, under constraint again and again. And that predictability is more valuable early on, typically, even than technical sophistication. Another useful question to ask yourself is, if we disappeared tomorrow, who would feel that pain and how quickly would they feel it? And if you can say specifically this specific integrator or this specific tier one would have a problem, then you're close to the kind of indispensability that is really highly valued in defense. So this explains why from the outside defense can look really conservative and really hard to enter. Once a supplier is qualified and is performing reliably, then the incentive for the industry is to stay with them. The cost and risk of change are really high. So your competition is not necessarily another supplier in an elevator with a great technology pitch. Your competition is truly the incumbent supplier, or it's just not changing anything. A final assessment that's really revealing is, are we comfortable being judged on consistency rather than growth? So I've mentioned a few times, defense really likes repeatable, trustworthy work. There's going to be long gaps between contract wins, and you need to have stability really rather than scale. So if that feels misaligned with your business and how you're measuring success today, it doesn't mean defense is wrong, but it does mean maybe you need to look at the timing and you need to look at the role definition. Next slide, Stuart. Okay, so if you've listened so far and you're seeing alignment and you're saying, yes, I want to keep going and learn more, great. We're going to have more webinars for you with more details. But today, let's take a look at what does the entry point actually look like in practice for SMEs. So in Canada, we tend to see a small number of repeatable patterns that SMEs are successful with in the sector. The most common pattern on the left is supplying components or services into existing defense systems. So that usually happens indirectly, lower down in the tier. And what companies do is they recognize what their customers are doing at the higher levels and look at how they can add more value. So bring on some of their work that they're taking on, increase traceability or administrative or documentation requirements, or help with sub-tier navigation and management. You can work with your customers to understand what can be absorbed from them and then work your way up the chain as you learn. A second really common pattern is dual use capabilities, taking something that was created for the commercial environment and adopting it for defense environments. So where we see companies be really successful with this is if their product or their process is already highly proven in a commercial space, and defense just adds one extra or one small or several small additional constraints. So things like we need your product to operate in a different environment or have a different life cycle, or again, improve traceability or administrative documentation. This path works really well, again, when we're talking about a selective adaptation of a product and not a complete pivot away from your commercial space. The third pattern, though, for companies that have high technology but maybe are not scaled enough to take on a lot of the work that has to happen for defense, is to work through integrators, consortia, or structured collaborations. So these arrangements allow SMEs to contribute within a defined scope, learn how the defense supply chain operates, and then build increasing credibility without taking on full system level responsibility. Next slide. Okay, so we told you in the overview of this session, we'll talk about some common missteps. One of the most common early missteps is talking to the wrong customer first. So assuming that we have to approach the D&D or we have to approach senior buyers at a prime. A more productive way to think about early engagement in defense is not who to talk to, but where can I start learning about defense with the lowest risk? So I spoke about taking a look at where your product is going. Do you have current customers that already have defense content somewhere in your portfolio or somewhere in theirs? That can help you to navigate that space, you can talk to you about how you can add value and learn more. And there are always or often a really realistic bridge into this ecosystem. And you can consider going up the tiers as well and see who has information. From there, you want to jump in and learn, have the conversations, not about selling more products, but about understanding how defense expectations are different from the commercial space. So around documentation, traceability, consistency, volumes, and life cycle supports. For manufacturers, this often looks like small adaptations to existing processes rather than complete changes or introducing new products. Next slide. Compliance is another area where early missteps are common. So claiming compliance before fully understanding what applies to your role, to your customer, and to your program can undermine credibility pretty quickly. A safer posture is being completely transparent. So be clear about what you currently need, where you see gaps and what you're actively working towards, and be clear about what you don't know. In defense environments, being honest about those gaps is often seen as a strength, and people will help you. And again, we'll be deep diving compliance next session. We also see companies, though, assuming that because they sell to the US, they already know how to sell into Canada. So if you're online and you're thinking of growing your Canadian content market, consider that the frameworks don't automatically translate. There's definitely overlap, but Canadian defense has its own procurement structures, has its own qualifications, and it has its own domestic considerations. So take time to understand that context, and consultants who are online, this is a huge value you can bring to help companies to navigate coming into the Canadian market. Finally, defense behaves very differently from fast growth commercial markets. I've spoken a few times, progress is measured on consistency, not speed. So companies that are looking for short cycle growth can become frustrated pretty quickly, not because they're doing something wrong technically, but because their expectations are not aligned with how the sector actually works. Okay, so the takeaway here is that these challenges, if you flip them over, they're opportunities to learn, to come into the sector and be successful. Next slide. All right, so let's talk about an opportunity that we see. Many companies start by looking for where can I take my product and sell it to something adjacent. So a really obvious example is a car manufacturer who thinks, okay, I'm looking to move into defense, so I'll go into land vehicles or armored vehicle platforms. And that's a really intuitive next step, and it makes a lot of sense. But we might also miss other markets if we stay at the product level. If you think about instead the processes, the materials, the tolerances, and the systems that you're really excellent at, you might be able to see, again, how that niche and very clear capability can be attractive in a completely different market. So sea, or air, or space, or even sustainability. Shifting to a capability focus for companies will also help them to add resiliency. Defense programs evolve over decades. Requirements can also shift really dramatically. So those companies who are focused on building capabilities find it much more easy to adapt to the new requirements. So keep your field of view wide and let your experienced customers help you see the fit. Next slide. Okay, so I've said it a few times, but it's worth saying again, the most important principle to leave with you is this: doing something wrong is much harder to recover from than doing nothing at all. But we have people here to help us to be successful. So that's why we've emphasized clarity in your offering over speed. When systems are designed to operate for decades, early decisions can carry very long-term consequences. So waiting and learning until you truly understand where you fit and how you reduce risk for your customer is a really responsible choice. So if you leave today with a clearer sense of whether defense aligns with your business, or with a decision to pause, to do a gap analysis, and to create a roadmap. That's a strong and intentional outcome, and we're happy to give you the option to help. Any questions you have, again, please put it into the chat, and we'll go deeper into all of these topics in future sessions. I'll pass it back to you, Stuart. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. So there are a lot of opportunities here. So we've tried to give you all a sense of reality about timing. This isn't going to happen overnight, but it is a really great place to be. We've talked about the potential then for long-term robust business relationships with customers. It's not easy to get in, but if you're in and you're performing, it's a good place to build your business and grow. If you supply aerospace, rail, mining, or heavy equipment OEMs today, you're closer to defense than you think, and you may already be there. You may just not know it. But like every other market, defense is about value proposition, and so you want to stick with your core strengths. So I wanted to give an example from my own career that I thought might be helpful. I ran a company that was an aerospace defense supplier. We were getting 95% of our revenue from parts we made for the F-22 aircraft. And we knew the F-22 was not going to be renewed. We had a 5-year window, and we knew that was the last 5 years of our existence if we didn't figure out something different to do that we could use our capabilities for. So we had to pivot. And we were making there are parts all over the F-22 that are screen panels that have shaped holes in them, and they're generally 5-axis machine parts. They have diamond or trapezoidal or other shaped holes in them for obvious reasons. The parts were made out of Inconel. They were made out of titanium. They were really complex parts. But when I looked at them and said, okay, we're going to go find another application for our capability, there was no one else in the world who was making parts that looked anything like what we were making. So I couldn't just go off and find a commercial application for these screen panels. So what we did is we took a step back and we said, okay, what are we good at and what are our core capabilities? We were machining hard metals. We were managing complex supply chains. We had really strong controls of configuration. We were very, very good at quality control. We had statistic process control in place. We drilled holes, and we were very, very good at drilling holes. And so we did that, and we looked at the things and said, okay, these are our core strengths. Forget the part in and of itself, because that's really not our product. Our product is the value we add, and our competency is where we're skillful at adding that value. And then we sent all of our people out to trade shows to look for things that looked anything like any of those things. Go find hard metal parts with holes in them. We went to our material suppliers who were providing us with raw materials and said, who else are you selling the same materials to? And we looked at them as potential customers, and we started to look at what's their business and what are they doing with these materials where we might have a fit. We looked at our consumable tooling manufacturers and we said, where are other people using the same types of consumable tooling that we use? Because they're likely doing something similar to us, and maybe we can find a market there. And so we looked at a lot of adjacencies based on our core strengths and our processes, and we found new opportunities. And then we pursued those opportunities, and we were really successful at that time in entering the energy market. We actually started making parts for General Electric land turbines. So from Lockheed Martin and Boeing F-22 parts to General Electric land turbines. Completely different applications. The parts looked really different, but from our standpoint, they were both precise machining, hole drilling, hard metals, required a lot of traceability, required strong quality control, required MRB. The customers talked a similar language, and so they were identical from the standpoint of how we made a living. And so there are a lot of opportunities here, and there's a reason we tried to go through the broad spectrum of the places things are being purchased. You really need to look at those and look at your core strengths and try to find where there's match. And those are the places to look for opportunity. And again, Dependability, low risk, and reliability are the keys to the market. So you want to go to your strengths. Go to the things you're already great at and find the other places that value add plays in the sector. And so we hope we've given you an overview of the market and maybe some ways to look at it and how you might fit in the market. It's my great pleasure now to introduce my colleague, MC Stevens, who has extensive experience, probably expensive too, but extensive experience regarding certification and compliance in the defense sector. And MC is going to talk a little bit about the next webinar in our series. So MC, to you.
Hello, everybody. So building on our first session, the second webinar will take us deeper into the export control and security landscape. So we will start by grounding everyone on the fundamentals of the Control Good program and ITAR, and then expand the discussion to a broader certification and security framework that often come into play. So we will touch on the CTPAT and the Canada-US Aligned program, as well as security clearance requirements that are linked to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. The goal is not just to explain the rules, but to help you understand how these framework connects and what they mean in practice for your organization, your project, and your team. So this session is meant to demystify what often feel complex and to give you a clearer path forward. La formation va être également disponible en français, donc je parle français. Donc, pour répéter, donc en continuité avec notre premier webinaire, cette deuxième session va nous amener plus loin dans l'univers des contrôles à l'exportation et des exigences en sécurité. Nous commencerons par une introduction aux bases du programme de marchandises contrôlées et de l'ITAR avant d'élargir la discussion aux certifications et cadres de sécurité qui s'y rattachent. Nous aborderons notamment le CTPAT, le programme harmonisé Canada-États-Unis, ainsi que les habilitations de sécurité liées au service canadien de renseignement de sécurité. L'objectif, c'est pas seulement de présenter les règles, mais de montrer comment elles s'articulent entre elles et ce qu'elles impliquent concrètement pour les organisations, les projets et les équipes. Cette session vise à clarifier un environnement souvent perçu comme complexe et pour vous outiller, dans le fond, pour la suite. Donc voilà.
Thanks, MC. So that concludes the presentation for today. I see we have a lot of questions in the chat. I don't know that we'll be able to answer all the questions, but we will certainly use the questions to prepare for our next webinars. So these have been recorded. They will be shared. We will be sharing the slides. The slides will be available in English and French. So they'll be available to everyone. And we thank you very much for attending our webinar. We hope that you took some useful information away from it.